My name is Linda Gonzalez. Today is the 15th of February 2017. I'm in Austin, Texas, and in the CMB interviewing Eddie Cavazos for the Voces Oral History Project. Thank you, Mr. Cavazos, for agreeing to be interviewed by our project. Please know that if there are any topics that you do not wish to discuss, you will not have to discuss them. Also, if there's something that you wish to discuss, we want to hear you. If at any point you wish to stop the camera and get a drink or use the facilities, please let us know. As we said earlier, your interview will be housed at the Nettie Lee Benson Library at the University of Texas at Austin campus. So let's begin. Could you tell me a little bit about your experience growing up in Corpus Christi?
Well, it was a lot different than today's, environment. First of all, my first recollection is growing up in a housing project, a city housing project, which I tell my children and my grandchildren that it was the fantastic part about it is there was hundreds of children my age. So there was not, there was always something going on. There was always a game, a contest, a basketball game or something. There was always somebody to play with. If you got upset with one of your friends, you could always play with some other friends. Everybody knew you. You knew all the residents. There was no crime at that time. So it was a very learning experience in the sense of getting to meet different kind of people with different kind of personalities. And it was an education you couldn't get in the school at that time. But it was just a different era. With we were able to, even when we moved to a regular house and knew all the neighbors and everybody knew each other. You played outside. You were hardly inside the house. One, there was no air conditioning, so no television, etc. So it was a great experience. You got to meet people, actually know all your neighbors. Mm-hmm. Most people right now don't know their neighbors outside of 1-2 houses. You knew everybody. Everybody knew you. So it was a diverse neighborhood, Hispanics, blacks. So you got a very wide education on the different kind of people, ethnic groups, etc.
From your experiences growing up there, how would you say that a childhood in South Texas might differ or be similar to someone who grew up in a different part of the state?
Well, I think it'd be the same. It was just at different times. Mm-hmm. It depends on the size of community you came from. If you came from a bigger city, it might be a little bit different. You came from a small rural area, it would be different. But at that time, Corpus was a small town. So we had a lot of things we could do that maybe in smaller rural areas there wasn't. But as far as the environment, the atmosphere, the family culture, it probably was the same.
So I know that you said that it was pretty diverse in the housing project. Do you have a way that you could break down the racial?
Oh, well, and not only the housing project, but my neighborhoods, probably, I would say 70% Hispanic, about 25% black, and 5% other.
What did your parents expect you to do when you grew up?
Well, my parents had very limited education. I think my father went to the 4th grade, and my mother probably about the same. So their concept was, if we got you through high school, they've done their job. I know that sounds bad now, but in those days, for them, to somebody that only went to the 3rd or 4th grade, having their children graduate from high school was a great accomplishment. I remember, and I've told this story a lot of times, my older sister, who was, 7 years older than I was, decided when she finished high school she was going to go away to college. And I remember her and my father having a drag-out fight about it, because her major was what at that time they called home economics. My father said, your mother can teach you how to cook and so forth, and then you're going all the way she was going all the way from Corpus to Kingsville, which is about 40 miles. She couldn't understand why she was leaving the house and learning something her mother could teach her. So from their standpoint, if they got you through high school, from their background, from their experience, that was a great accomplishment. So there was no talk about you should go to college or, you know, the idea was you finish high school, you get a job, you go to work, make a living.
So by the time that you got to high school and you needed to start thinking about what you were going to do after graduation, what were you thinking and why?
Well, you know, I was thinking of college because that's what I heard from some other friends. Never got that kind of discussion at home compared to like my children and my grandchildren are already talking about, you know, most of them are in college already, but they know where they're going, et cetera, and we encourage that. So that wasn't discussed, but some of my friends were going to college and talking about it, and I remember inquiring about it with a friend of mine. He said, well, go talk to your counselor, which I had never spoken with, did not know a counselor existed. I don't know what a counselor was. And when I went to the counselor, she looked at my information, grades, and so forth. And she decided she was not Hispanic. She said, well, you know, her exact words to me were this: your people don't go to college. You need to go to the military. You know, you need, I'll give you 4 options. And I thought she was going to say Texas or Baylor, whatever. And she said the Army and Marines, the Navy, or the Air Force. So I joined the Army. There was no encouragement from the school at that time for us to think about going to college or planning or whatever, counseling and so forth. So it was all something I heard, something a lot of my friends were doing. I wasn't really ready for college, so that's why I joined the military.
Was there a particular reason you chose the Army over the other 3?
Not really. They offered, one of their advertisements was that if you volunteered, you got to pick where you served. And being from Corpus and not having gone anywhere, I thought it'd be great to be stationed in San Antonio. So, and they promised me they would send me to San Antonio. Instead, they sent me to Germany for almost 3 years, which worked out great because I got to go to Europe, but that's the way the Army worked back in those days.
All right, so who were some of the more influential adults in your life when you were younger? If counselors didn't guide you, were there any teachers or family members that you looked up to?
Yes, there was teachers and family members. I had a lot of cousins that were educated, had degrees. You know, most of them were in education. There were teachers. I had a cousin that was a pharmacist. My sister was going to school and she finished. And that kept me thinking about it. But the issue really came when I really decided I needed education was when I was sitting in the military with a lot of time to think and realize that the officers that were around me, that were in charge of me, all had degrees. And I put 2 and 2 together. So, you know, this is not the way to go. So while I was in the military, I kept thinking about when I get back, I need to go get a formal education.
And in addition to that, were there any particular events or moments that had a similar impact in your life?
Well, you know, there was the one thing that and I've been involved in politics all my life ever since I came back from the military. And the one person that did that was John Kennedy. I had never even paid attention to who was the president. I knew who the presidents were, obviously, and so forth. But when he became president, I think it inspired a lot of people, a lot of young people. And ever since that day, when he got elected, I started reading more about it, listening to it about it, studying it, wondering, you know, learning and so forth. So that kind of changed my whole mindset about what I wanted to do and so forth.
As a young person, were you interested in politics or activism before his presidency?
No, I wasn't. That's the whole point. You know, you understand when I left for the military, I was 17 years old, and politics was the furthest thing from my mind. But when he got elected and the whole concept of the Kennedy administration, it was just an eye-opener for me. And it was exciting, and that's when I started reading the newspapers about what was going on in Congress and so forth, and started learning more about how important it was. Up to then, it was just, you know, I'm 17 years old, going day to day, no particular goals and so forth. But that really was a turning point in my life.
So when you finished with your military service, that was 1963, correct?
63, yes.
And in 65, you went to college.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you studied and why you chose that?
Well, I was married and already had one child, so I had to start going to night school at a community college just because of my job and so forth. So basically, even at that time, it was basically just, you know, the basics, the first 2 years and so forth. And it took a long time going part-time at night and working during the daytime to complete that. Now, once I got to the upper level and went to A&I in Kingsville, I started looking into the business degree, because I was working at this Reynolds Metals, and at the time I was operating a mainframe computer, which was bigger than this room, and it was in accounting. So I figured this is what I want to do. I want to do an accounting. I wanted to get an accounting degree, and that's what I started going after.
Why did you choose the university or the college that was in Kingsville over the one that was in Corpus?
Well, the proximity. At that time, and that's one of the issues we're going to talk about later, at that time, that was all there was around. There was no four-year college in Corpus. There was a Baptist school there, but there was no state school, just a community college. And the nearest university was in Kingsville, so I had to drive 40 miles, 80-mile round trip to get there. Unless you left your job and moved your family, there was nothing you could do but go with what was available.
You served on the Texas Legislature for 5 terms, correct?
5 terms.
And before that, you had run for city councilman in Corpus.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about the experiences that led to your interest in politics and about when you first decided to run for office?
Well, I got involved with LULAC Council Number 1 in Corpus, and we were an organization that got involved in civil rights, education, voting rights, et cetera, and which things that are still doing. So I started getting involved in politics, mainly volunteering, go get the coffee, go put up the signs and so forth. And gradually, the more I got involved into strategizing, recruiting candidates, et cetera. And then one day the tables were turned on me. The people that I used to work with to recruit candidates turned on me and said, "You're the guy we're going to run now," which I had no intention ever of running for office. I love politics. I enjoyed it, being involved in it. We got involved, for example, with LULAC Council Number 1 and the labor unions in Corpus. We filed a lawsuit to integrate the public schools in Corpus Christi. And the concept came from, it's very interesting, because what the school district in Corpus was doing was building new schools in Corpus, which is the south side of town, the predominantly Anglo community. Not only were they not building new schools in the west side, where all the Hispanics were, they weren't maintaining the ones they had. They weren't fixing them. There were schools with broken windows, bathrooms that didn't work, et cetera, very poor conditions. So as we were pondering what to do about it, a gentleman got this great idea, and I don't remember his name, but he said, if the Anglo families had to send their children to our schools, they would go to the school board and complain, because the Hispanic families, most of the parents did not have an education, did not have the courage, or they just didn't feel comfortable going to the school board because they didn't have an education and so forth. So we came up with the idea of suing the school district on a basis of integration, but the whole idea was to get the young Anglo kids to come to the West Side schools. And we won the lawsuit, and the schools were integrated, and that sure enough happened. Weeks after that started, Anglo parents went to the school board and said, look, you're going to send my kid over there? That's fine. but you're going to have to start fixing them. And that lasted several years. And when the school district and the city and everybody came to us and said, look, we want to stop the busing, we said, well, fine. You start building new schools in the west side for the Hispanic community. And ever since then, they would build what they call sister schools. They will build the same school twice, one on each side of town. And eventually we got schools for the Hispanic kids where they could go to good schools. And other programs where we started a program where the school district would hire the principal, and the principal then would go out and hire the best teachers. She would hire everybody all the way down to a janitor. And we picked the worst performing school in Corpus. Had been horrible for years. Got this lady to take it over, and in 1 year they were recognized as one of the top elementary schools in the nation. And we did several schools like that. We just turned them around completely by paying them a little extra money, getting them involved in the community and so forth. Unfortunately, that program is great until you run out of the good teachers. Because then everybody wanted to go there, and we were doing them on the Hispanic side of town. And then the Anglo community said, hey, we want some of those schools over here. So that involvement in the civil rights issue and the schools lit the flame and kept it burning for me to be involved in it.
And that's what led you to run for city council?
That, and we did another lawsuit. We sued the city because everybody got elected at large, and there was all Anglo city council. We could not get a Hispanic elected, so we sued for single member districts in the city council and federal court, and with the help of MALDEF, and we won the lawsuit, and so we opened up some single member districts. We started getting Hispanics elected. And then for some reason, I don't know why I agreed to run for office, but I ran on the at-large, which is citywide. And I ran, there was 6 or 8 of us, got into the runoff, and then lost in the runoff by a couple of hundred votes. And that was my run for city council. After that, I ran for the state legislature.
Well, how long was it between those time frames?
Actually, it seemed like it was one day after another one because I had told my friends, I'm not ever running for office again. I told my wife, this is it, I'm never running for office again. And then the state legislature that represented where I lived decided he was going to run for Congress. So I got invited to a lunch with all the people that I work with, and there was about 20 people there. We were having lunch. And so I said, what are we here for? And he said, well, we're going to, Arnold Gonzalez is running for Congress. We need to recruit somebody to run in his place. I said, great. What do we have in mind? And it was like a choir. They all said the same thing, you. I said, no. I said, I just ran, interested in running again. Well, long story short, I ran and got elected.
So I found an old Texas Monthly article from 1987 that had a little profile on you, and it was essentially called The Best and Worst Legislators of Texas, and you were on the best list.
Right.
And from the author's opinion, you had a pretty quick rise your first term there, and he described you as a court jester.
Just before you jump in, I'd just like to adjust the microphone.
Oh, did I move it?
We're getting a little bit of moving around sounds.
Okay.
Just to make
Sorry
sure.
about that.
Do I need to start the question over?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I found an old Texas Monthly article from 1987 profiling the best and worst legislators of Texas, and you made the best list. You were described as a court jester who became a prince, and the author described your rise in your first term to essentially becoming a feared adversary in floor debate and a major inside player, one of 5 House members on the powerful conference committee to negotiate the state budget. Could you expand a little bit on how you learned to navigate the Texas legislators so quickly?
Well, it was an on-hands learning experience, and what they mentioned, the court jester. I've always liked to kid around, and so I use that spirit because sometimes I love debates to begin with, and sometimes that debate got heated and personal, and people would get mad and so forth. passionate about their issues. And I decided it just came out that I would use my comedic timing, or to break up tension. I would tell a story, a joke or something, and I love debating, and which is one thing that doesn't happen very much anymore. But I used to love to debate on an issue, and it just became to a part where people enjoyed me being in the microphone. The way it works in the House floor is you have two microphones, one on each end of the floor. The front microphone is for the person that is laying out a proposed bill, a legislation. The rear microphone is for anybody who wants to ask questions, good questions in the sense I'm supporting your bill, or just inquisitive or opposing deals. So I got to the point where I was pretty good at going to the microphones and debating issues and so forth. And my sense was, I've always believed it's important what we did, but not to the point of getting mad or attacking people and so forth. I used to win most of my arguments by making a point that would make people laugh and so forth. But it was a point that they could understand. When people are listening and not mad at you or at the other person, they have an open mind. They can hear what's going on. So I learned that that was a very effective tool. And the other thing that I learned was a lot of members of the legislature get into a certain area and they're comfortable with certain members of their own party, or rural members, or big city members, or whatever it might be. My concept was there was 150 members of the state legislature. You needed 76 votes to pass a bill. I didn't care if they were Republican, Democrat, if they were tall, short, or from the farm countries or the big cities. I worked everybody. I got to know all the members. And that was, I think, what helped me a lot in navigating through the process.
Were there any specific challenges that you ran into that first year?
The first year actually was a learning experience. There's a saying that freshmen should be seen, not heard. So it was learning experience, asking questions, learning the hard way, getting your bills defeated because you weren't prepared. At my first term I had a piece of legislation, and I said, man, this is great. Everybody's going to love this. And you lay it out, all of a sudden there's 10 people arguing against your bill. I'm going, what's wrong with these people? This is a great piece of legislation. So I was very naive from that point, and I went and talked to him. I said, what's your problem with this bill? Well, this word or this sentence, and so forth and so on. So I learned that if you have something you want to do, go talk to people it impacts. I know this is not something you like, but read this and tell me what you think about it. And sometimes we agreed on the changes, sometimes you couldn't. But I started understanding the process, understanding that I had to be more prepared, not just go up there because I thought this was great and I was a great guy. Everybody's going to pass my bills. It doesn't work that way. So you have to gain their respect. And respect by that I mean know what you're talking about. Do never go to the microphone and say something and if you cannot answer the questions. Once you do that, you lose all credibility. You have to be seen by other members that you know what you're discussing. And the other thing that you learn is there's so many issues that come up to the state legislature. Issues that, whether it be legal, healthcare, education, business-related issues, security issues, whatever. And not one member is an expert on all of them. So you learn to identify members that are experts in law, experts in that have the way you think about issues, and you respect, and you don't feel like they're going to lie to you. So if you're sitting there and they're debating an issue relating to healthcare or the legal profession, you look to a member that's a lawyer or a doctor or is involved in healthcare and education. If he or she is for it, then I'm for it, because it's something that I really don't understand. So you learn to listen, ask questions, and a lot of members, like I say, have their own way of doing it, and they think they can push things through without working with other people. And it just, you have to work with all the members, and you know, that's one of the problems we have today, and not only in state government but in Washington with the Congress. It's all partisan. It's either Republican or Democrat, and the two don't work together. And that, fortunately, when I was serving, was not the case. It was mostly Democrats, but you have to understand Texas has always been a conservative state. Republicans ran as Democrats because there was no party, there was no way they could get elected. So even though everybody was listed as a Democrat, there was very conservative Democrats that were basically today would be Republicans. So it wasn't that we were all Democrats. So, but it's a process of working with everybody. You know, you can get upset with each other, but after the debate is over, it was over. It was not personal. Nowadays, it's very personal. If you're for something and the other party doesn't agree, you know, you're ostracized. You're not part of our group anymore, and so forth. So very different now. So it was a learning experience for me.
That's very interesting. With that information, I'd like first to start getting into your involvement with the South Border Texas Initiative. How did the South Texas Delegation of Legislators become involved in the sort of kind of percolating movement that led to the lawsuit in the first place? Well,
there's always been a lack of services for South Texas, simply because of lack of power in the legislature. We tend to change members, senators, representatives a lot. The rural areas, a gentleman would run in the rural area and he'd serve for 40 years. So he'd have a lot of power. Seniority creates a lot of power. So the concept was that, and my line was always, if you live in South Texas and you want to get a PhD, and you want it to be a Hispanic minor, a bilingual minor, you had an opportunity, because the only two PhDs in South Texas was a bilingual PhD in Kingsville and a mining PhD in El Paso. So on the line from El Paso across the street below, if you wanted to be a bilingual minor, you had an opportunity to get a degree. That was it. There was no other PhDs in South Texas. There was only A&I in Kingsville. There was Pan American in the Valley, and everything else was community colleges and so forth. So if you wanted to get a college degree, you had to move, and it was okay if you came from a family that could afford it. You had an opportunity to travel to Austin, to College Station, to Houston, Dallas, and so forth to get your education. It was there. But if your parents couldn't afford to send you, if you didn't have a scholarship, if you were married and the husband or the wife wanted to continue or get an education, they couldn't do it because they had to leave town. So the funding for education in South Texas was basically not there. And we fought for it. We couldn't get the votes for it. So in conjunction with MALDEF, we decided that the only thing we could do is take them to court. That has been our fallback forever for everything in civil rights and education and so forth. So we started getting together and saying, look, this is what we need in South Texas. And every time we went to them, they said, hey, it's coming, you just wait, and so forth and so on. So that issue was always ahead in front of us. I remember serving on appropriations and fighting against cuts in higher education for UT and A&M and all other schools. And one evening after we were successful, I was invited to dinner by a gentleman who was the chairman of the board of UT, and he wanted to thank me for helping UT get some funding. And I said, well, that's great, but I'm not going to do it anymore. I said, I'm tired of coming up here, working hard to get money for higher education, and I go home, I have nothing. And he says, well, what do you want? I said, we want a UT campus in South Texas. And he said, well, I'm for it, let's work on it. And that's how we started working on that concept of bringing UT and A&M to South Texas, besides the lawsuit.
Was there any communication with MALDEF or organizations long before the suit was filed? Like, they also had the same idea in mind?
MALDEF is a great organization. They have great attorneys. Al Coffin was the head of MALDEF. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have done much. But most people don't understand, because I would get approached by other people later. Hey, get MALDEF to get involved with this. Get MALDEF to get involved with this. It costs money to file a lawsuit. It costs money to hire lawyers. And they all thought that it was free. So to get MALDEF involved, we had to, one, get some money for them. It was one of the issues that support the lawsuit, because it takes hours of, deposing people and so forth. Legal costs were extreme. So the question wasn't, should we file the lawsuit? The question is, how are we going to pay for it? What areas were we going to address and so forth? So there was numerous meetings to discussing. MALDEF had the legal issues, we had to come up with how to fund it, who was going to get involved in it, who was going to testify, where was the lawsuit going to be filed, what were the chances, and so forth. So we had multiple meetings of that. At the same time, pre-lawsuit and during the lawsuit, we organized some secretive meetings till what even today nobody knows about. And when I say nobody, the main thing was the media. We hid it from the media, how we did it, how it happened, to have something that got originated here in the legislature in Austin that is covered by the media 24/7. And we swore everybody that was there to secrecy, and all of them kept it. I mean, to this day, I still can't believe that we were able to do it. But we met in Trinity University in San Antonio. We had multiple meetings to discuss the issues of higher education in South Texas. There was legislators, and we invited, there was community people, invited community leaders from the major cities, from Corpus, Kingsville, Laredo, the Valley, to come to those meetings, mayors, civic leaders, and so forth, to discuss the future of higher education in South Texas. Because the concern we have, and initially when we did it, we told everybody, it was Al Coffin, myself, and Henry Cisneros that were the organizers of this thing. We told every city, go back home, come back to the next meeting, tell us what you want in higher education. And sure enough, they all came back with a list of PhDs, and everybody wanted the same thing. And our idea was, look, guys, we cannot show up with asking for 10 PhDs for Brownsville, 10 for McAllen, 10 for Kingsville, for Laredo, and for Corpus and El Paso. I said, that's 60 people. We have one, we have two. We said, we cannot go that giant a leap. So we said, when they came back for the first meeting, I remember the city of Laredo wanted a PhD in electrical engineering. In Laredo, I said, let me ask you all a question. Where do you think your graduates from PhDs in electrical engineering are going to be the day after they graduate? Well, what do you mean? I said, I'll tell you where they're going to be. They're going to be at the bus station, leaving town, because there's no jobs in Laredo for PhDs in electrical engineering. So I said, go back, get reality on this. What is it you want? What is it that you need in your community, whether it be in healthcare, in education, so we can, not everybody can ask for the same thing. It's in the number we're trying to get, it would be very disadvantaged to ask to get two PhDs in the same thing 50 miles apart. If we wanted veterinarians, we wanted law school, we wanted this, etc. So we met for months privately in San Antonio at the Trinity University, and had a lot of planning involved. So when the time came to designate who would go after what, because there's an old concept in politics, we divide you, we can conquer you. So what our line was to everybody was, look, they're going to try to divide you all by saying, look, Corpus, we want to put this here, but we don't want to put this in the Valley. You support us against Brownsville. And we said, they're going to try and divide us. So we got to stick together as one group. And you might not get what you want. The Corpus might get something that you want, or vice versa. You cannot jump ship, because that's what they want you to do. And again, to my surprise, dead hell. Everybody agreed. We argued, we discussed. We said, you guys got to work it out. I said, we don't want to pick what each city gets. We'd like for you guys to decide among each other. And they did. It was very a great learning experience about people and the people that are leaders, that they want the best for the community, but then you realize we're one group in South Texas, and if we work together, we can get something done. If we don't work together, what's been happening for years is they'll tell the Valley people something, they'll tell the Corpus people something else, and we start fighting each other, and the dust settles. We find that the enemy was us. We were, that they love to do that, pit us against each other. So the concept of that whole meeting was to organize, to agree, and it was tough to get everybody to agree, but everybody finally worked out a plan where everybody was getting something. And when we came up here to do the legislation, there were the state leaders, Texas A&M leaders were stunned that we had such unity, and they couldn't use their old tactics anymore. They tried, but we kept reinforcing each other. I remember when people from A&M came to see me, and they said, we want to make the school in Corpus a great university. We want to do this, but we don't want to do this in Laredo. I said, guys, don't start with me. I said, because you're going to go to Laredo and tell them you want to do great things in Laredo, but we don't want to do this in Corpus, so we start fighting each other. And they tried, but they couldn't crack the solidarity we had. And that was a great effort by us and by everybody to stay together as a group and as a unit, and that was a force to be reckoned with.
Mm. Were there any specific compromises that were really hard to kind of chew through as a group, that maybe someone from a certain college or organization wanted something and they just didn't want to let it go?
Well, yes, that's my whole point, that the first meeting, they all had a Christmas list. And we said, guys, go back home and pare it down. And they came back with a...
Is there a specific one you remember by anyone?
All of them.
Okay.
All of them. I mean, all of them wanted the whole gamut of PhDs and master's programs and so forth. You have to understand that the way higher education is funded, the more professional degrees you have, the more PhDs, the more master's degrees, you get more money. So if you go from 0 PhD programs to 5 and more master's degree programs, you're going to get more money from the state. And that's how the discrepancy widened every year, because Austin, Dallas, Houston had all the programs, they get all the funding. They would say, hey, it's not us, that's the formula. Okay, the formula is set up where, so we realized that to get more money, you had to get more programs. So everybody wanted everything. The second meeting, they pared it down some more. The third meeting, they came back some more. And then we finally said, guys, we're going to put you in a room. Hopefully nobody's going to kill each other, and work it out. And they did. There were some people that were disgruntled. They weren't happy with what they were getting. But I think overall, they realized that it was going to be a benefit for all the students. And that was our saying. Don't think of what's good for just for you or the faculty or whatever. Think of what's best for your students. And in the long run, that was the guiding factor.
How did the LULAC versus Richards lawsuit eventually motivate the Texas legislator? I read that initially it wasn't responding to the lawsuit, and it was just being informed of it, but simultaneously preparing a strategy for it. How did it eventually start getting the gears to work in the political machine?
Well, I mean, a court order is very strong. And you're correct. They try to ignore it. They try to say, well, we're going to look at it. We're going to appeal it. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And they tried everything in the world. You have to understand that those schools with the money and the power, when you get money and power, you don't want to lose it. You don't care what it is, who it is. And they tried every tactic, organized against us. Well, we worked the legislature. We kept working at it. And not only talking to them, but showing them the differences and so forth. And, my argument with UT and A&M always was, even back then, they were saying that they were at capacity. And my argument was this: a lot of students should come to Austin and College Station. They're good ones that can afford it. They have the grades and so forth. But not every student in South Texas needs to come to Austin or College Station. If they can get a good college education in their neighborhood, in their hometown, in the areas where they live, they can stay home, not have the added expense, help with a family, get a part-time job, et cetera, and so forth. It's a lot less expensive to do it when you can drive in 30 minutes to the campus and so forth. And that made a lot of sense to the other members. So we're not trying to, in the first place, one, we're not trying to harm your schools as far as funding. It's not going to impact any money that you get. We're not trying to take away students from you. A&M and UT already were full at that time, which they are now. They are every year. So I said, it's not going to hurt anybody. And but they tried to ignore it, but we kept Representative Irma Rangel, the late Irma Rangel, was then chairman of higher education. And she had a powerful bully pulpit as chairman of it. When you're chairman of a committee, the other members want something for their schools, and you say, fine, but you got to support my program. So we had members in powerful positions at that time that could say, hey, you know, if you support my higher education program in South Texas, I can support your legislation. So that started getting us a lot of support, you know, because the art of getting things done in the state legislature at that time was you've got to compromise, you've got to work, you've got to agree, you know, if you give me this, I'll give you that, and so forth. And that's what we did. We were all the members of the South Texas delegation from Corpus to the Valley. We worked as a group together, and we stuck together. And they kept trying to divide us, and hey, we'll give you this, but we can't give you that. And that eventually won the battle.
Is that what led to the Joint Committee on Higher Education forming?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the concept of that was after that meeting I had with the regent from UT. And one of the things that he suggested was, why don't you get a resolution calling for a study of higher education needs in South Texas. So we did a resolution, and we got the House and the Senate to appoint a committee to have hearings and testimonies from, we had hearings all the way from Corpus, Kingsville, Laredo, the Valley, Brownsville, McAllen, to hear people come testify. What was needed in the Valley, what wasn't needed. You know, and the funny thing is, the only opposition we got in South Texas was the changing of the names. It's unbelievable, but people were all for the merger, all for having A&M and UT down there, but we don't want to lose our names. I mean, and the biggest one was A&I in Kingsville. To this date, I'm not very popular with those people because we changed the name to A&M Kingsville, and they're still trying to change it back. So it stunned me that we were prepared to hear arguments about what educational programs you're going to bring, what is it we need. It was just don't change the name of the school, don't take our football team away. I mean, it's unbelievable. But we had hearings. It was a House-Senate Joint Committee. I was co-chair with Senator Carlos Truan, the late Carlos Truan. We're both from Corpus. And we had hearings all over South Texas. And then from that, we drafted the legislation that brought the merger.
How did the two of you get into that position of being co-chairs and being kind of the lead on this effort?
Well, since my meeting with the regent and getting the resolution drawn, I was the proponent of the whole concept. And I had been working on this for issues back in Corpus. My whole idea at that time was to get University of Texas campus in Corpus, simply because that's the regent from Texas was the one that talked to me. And spoke to the Speaker of the House. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to ask you to appoint a committee. He said, let me know when you're ready. We'll appoint the committee. And a strange, funny thing happened because I'm working with the University of Texas regents, not the management, but the regents. And I get a call one day from the chairman of the regents of the A&M system. And the gentleman that I had been mentioning chairman of the Board of Regents at UT was Jess Hay. And the gentleman from A&M called me and says, what are you and Jess Hay up to? And I'm going, well, we're talking about bringing UT to South Texas, hopefully to Corpus. And his response was, you know, it's like when you're talking to children was, well, what about us? And these are the people that I'd been asking for years about doing this, and they would say, no, later, you know, they didn't want to talk to me about it. But when they saw that we were getting involved with UT, A&M said, hey, we want to be part of the program. So what happened was, the other issue we had to work out was where the schools were going to be. Initially, I wanted UT to Corpus, but then I agreed with the caucus and said, the Hispanic caucus, and I said, look, since we're all involved in this, let's have a study, and we'll put the UT campus where we think is the best. Not we, but the professionals that do that and so forth, whether it be in Corpus, in Kingsville, or the Valley. When A&M got involved, now we had the two leading major institutions in the state of Texas wanted to be involved with expanding their campuses to South Texas. Well, they got together by themselves and came to me with a plan. And the plan was this, that UT would come to the Valley and Brownsville and McAllen, the Penn American and Southmost College, take that over. And A&M would come to Corpus, Kingsville, and Laredo, which took away a lot of the unknowns as to where we're going to go, took away a lot of the debates of, you know, I want this and no, you want that. And everybody agreed to it. Members of the caucus agreed to it. That would be, it was in the best interest of the two institutions, and it jived with, it meshed with what we wanted to do.
Do you have any idea of how they reached that compromise, or what were the deciding factors?
It was because UT already had some programs in the Valley. Mm-hmm. They had a presence there. A&M had some presence in Kingsville and Laredo and so forth. So they sensed that would be the best thing for them to do that. Now, it wasn't that simple after that. I mean, even I remember, like I told you earlier, A&M came to me and said, look, we don't want this, we don't want Laredo, we don't want Kingsville. They kept trying to divide us, but eventually it stayed like that because they finally, and I spoke with all the A&M UT people later, and I said, what made you guys turn around, 360-degree turn and all of a sudden start supporting this process? So we felt you had the votes. So we figured if this is going to happen, we better have some input in it. And that's when I felt that we were winning the whole process. Won the lawsuit. We got them to turn around on their obstruction, on their negativity, on their we're not going to do it. And they finally said, well, it looks like it's going to happen. We better be part of it.
The existing language, looking back on it now, is that the state found it within its interests to allocate funds and resources to higher education in South Texas. But was there any pushback in the legislature itself against wanting to do that?
Yes, well, the pushback was in the money. It's always the money. Okay, who has it? Whoever has the money has the power. There was a sense that we were taking money from other institutions, which I'm sure it happened at one point, but the argument that we made was, look, these people in this part of the state are not getting an education. Therefore, they're not, a lot of them might not be able to get jobs. Therefore, they might be unemployed. They might go on the welfare system. We're going to pay for these people one way or the other. The state's going to pay for them. Either you educate them and they become tax-paying citizens with a job, or they become a liability to the state. And the numbers are there. There was an old TV commercial a long time ago about an oil filter for a car. It said, you know, you can pay me now or pay me later when the engine breaks down. So eventually the argument mostly was, are you taking my programs away? Are you taking money from my school? Et cetera. And those are the things we had to discuss and convince them that this was not going to happen. But, you know, when you talk about the legislation calls for funding and so forth, and I warned the people in South Texas, and I warned people in my hometown. I said, look, we're joining the family. Okay, the example I gave was you marry somebody in a rich family. Now you're part of the family. It doesn't mean you're going to get any of the money. And exactly is what's happened. As soon as we got the campuses organized and so forth, funding for those schools is not the same as here. The best example I can give you is something you can see right now. There's never been a medical school in South Texas. So UT wanted a medical school here in Austin, which they got. And the way they got the votes from the members from South Texas, this is long after I left, if they agreed to put a medical school in the Valley, okay? And if you go to the campus right now of UT Medical School, it's almost finished. You go down to South Texas, it's still in the developing stage because the money that they got here is 10 times the amount of money that's going to the medical school in South Texas. So my whole point is we're part of the family, but we still have to fight for every penny, every nickel that we get for the schools down there.
The Joint Committee gathered a lot of its information from testimony from a wide amount of sources,
Yes.
like you mentioned. Is there any, I'm wondering if you have any specific memories of testimony that really resonated and that really helped to push the movement forward?
Well, personal stories, example of a married couple with children and the wife wanting to go get her master's or the husband wanted to finish his undergraduate or whatever, and they couldn't. They either had to relocate basically, or the wife had to leave the family, or travel to Austin and go back home every day. The reality that somebody in Austin, a family in Austin, the husband and the wife says, "You don't want to go get my master's?" Boom, you register in Dallas and A&M and so forth. In South Texas, you have to get a job up here. You have to move because you cannot travel. Those personal stories were, I think, the most important of the people that had ambitions, desires, and had the education background. They qualified for everything that they needed to continue their education, but there was no facilities available. And then you talk about, I remember at the same time we were getting A&M for Corpus Christi, we also got awarded by the United States Navy what they call a home port. At that time they were trying to organize all their ports in the United States. Instead of having them all over the country, having one port for a lot of ships. And we got one. We beat out Houston, Galveston, a bunch of ports to get that. And there was an economist down there who said, "Man, you guys are doing great. You got the home port, you got the four-year university." I said, "Yeah, we're excited about home port, the jobs and so forth." He said, "Let me tell you something. A four-year university with some research will bring you more jobs than any military base you can have." And this was a big base. Eventually it didn't happen, but which something that's always stuck to me. It was Ray Perriman that told me that. He said, who was a real known economist here in the state of Texas, a four-year university in your community brings you more jobs, better paying jobs for the community, because people can think that the companies that are trying to relocate or start a business was going to hire many people. They did think about the tax structure. How much are the taxes they're going to have to pay there? And that's one of the issues they face. But the number one issue for a company relocating or establishing a plant or whatever is the quality of the workforce, the quality of the level of education of your workforce. I know we've had many occasions in South Texas where people wanted to build a plant or something, and they say, we can't find any qualified people to do the job because there was no higher education facilities. So by having all these facilities with UT and A&M, it has brought up the level of the quality, the level and the quality of the workforce available for jobs. So it brings more jobs, but more importantly, better paying jobs for the community, which benefits everybody.
Now, the merger of the 5 South Texas schools with UT and A&M came about by legislation during the lawsuit. And at the time, State Senator Hector Uribe had said that the action was a little too late and that the lawsuit would still go forth. What were your thoughts about that, looking back?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Senator Hector Uribe had said
Right.
that the merger was essentially a little too late and that the lawsuit would still go forth because it came about during the time of the trial.
Right.
And so what were your thoughts at the time? Were you fully aware that the lawsuit would still be going forth?
Oh, yes. I personally thought that a two-pronged attack was better than a one, because we didn't know we were going to win the lawsuit. Okay? If we stopped this merger discussions and we lost the lawsuit, we're back at square one. So you never know what's going to happen in court. We thought we had a great argument, which we did, but there was no guarantee that one or the other would succeed. So if we had dropped this one, the merger talk, and the lawsuit failed, then we were back at square one. So we figured if we lose the merger talks, but we win the lawsuit, we have something. We were fortunate that we won the lawsuit, and we were able to put together the merger.
Were there any aspects about the initiative that you think that it still didn't fully address, or were you content with the full scope of it?
Oh no, I was aware of it as getting people to understand that the funding, getting money from the systems is not an easy job. I mean, the leadership of our universities, the president and so forth, they have to be up here during the session constantly asking for money for programs because there's a big fight for education money, and UT will give us some, or A&M, but not everything you want. And they've done a great job, don't get me wrong, but they just don't sit here and say, what kind of check do you want, and write it, right? You have to prepare for it. You have to convince them that that's what you need. They do studies also. So it's an ongoing issue with every higher institution. It's not, they don't have they're not going to give you a blank check, let me put it that way. So that was something that a lot of people thought, we merged, our worries are over, the programs are coming, the money's coming. It doesn't work that way. And it still doesn't work that way. And it never will.
How did y'all celebrate afterwards?
Oh, we had a lot of, here in Austin, everybody was here from the Valley and Corpus and so forth when we passed the legislation. It was just a joyous occasion. The community came together. That was one of the things that really impressed me in all the communities, is because when we did the hearings or the meetings in San Antonio, the level of cooperation, and now I'm sure there were different opinions in the communities, but when we got here for the legislation and we got it passed, the cohesiveness of the group, the way we stuck together. These were people from different cities, different parts of the state that knew each other, but were here to improve the quality of education in their area, and they all agreed to work together. So it was a giant celebration all over. It was fantastic. It was to me it was. I mean, I felt like it was a 300-pound gorilla that I got off my back, because there was a lot of pressure. It took a lot of time, and I felt that if we didn't do it this time, it was going to be another 10, 20 years before we did anything.
Did you go to the opening ceremonies after the schools merged?
Yes, yes. I still go back to the campus in Corpus has been, the funding that they've gotten for new buildings and new programs, it's been amazing. It's just, in all the schools, and now with the medical school in South Texas and so forth. It's been a great event, a great thing in my life.
I have a question here asking about Rick Perry's role.
Rick Perry? Oh, yes, I'm glad you brought that up. That evening that I had dinner with the chairman of the Board of Regents, Mr. Jesse, I got really excited. I called everybody and said, look what Jesse said. The next morning, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, wow. I said, that was great, but there's 9 members of the Board of Regents. And even though he's the chairman, that's just one vote. 1 out of 9 is not going to get you anything. So the next morning on the floor of the House, we have a little members lounge there where we go have coffee. And I was having coffee, and Rick Perry showed up and sat down with me. And he said, "What's going on?" He said, "You look depressed." I said, "Well, this is what happened last night." And he said, "Well, that's great." I said, "Yeah, Rick, but and Rick and I were friends then, or still friends." I said, "That's only one member of the Board of Regents. You know, you got to have 5 to get something done." And then we went back to our business, and about 2 hours later, he comes by my desk. He says, "Be at the Headliners tonight, the club." So what's going on? I said, "Just be there." So I show up, and he's there with a couple of other legislators, friends of mine. And he's got 4 members of the Board of Regents. And he says, "Eddie, tell these members about your meeting with Jess Hay." And I told him about that I wanted, at that time I was talking about a UT campus in Corpus. And the Board of Regents, all 4 looked at me and said, "Well, what did Mr. Hay say?" I said, "He was for it." They looked at each other and they said, "Well, we're for it." All of a sudden, because of the help of Rick Perry, I've got the 5 votes I need. And it took off from there. If it hadn't been for Rick's involvement at the time, and I always give him credit for that, because he had a lot to do with this whole concept getting started.
I have a quick detail follow-up. Why did y'all meet at Trinity University in San Antonio?
Well, we were trying to meet somewhere outside of here, because if you get 2 members or more, the media's going to find out where you're at. Trinity offered us a facility, offered us secrecy. We met there. They were fantastic. They opened up the room for us. They gave us refreshments and so forth. They gave us staff, and gave us a place to meet where nobody knew we were meeting, away from the Capitol, and it was kind of a central for everybody from South Texas to come up. Instead of having one end of Valley or in Corpus, this was a neutral site, which takes away. Consider this: if I said we're going to have the meetings in Corpus, people from the Valley and Laredo said, "Why are we going to Corpus to discuss higher education? We need to have the meeting here." That's the first objection you're going to get. So we had the neutral site. Everybody felt better. It wasn't Eddie's place or so-and-so's place. But the university, through Al and Andrew Cisneros' efforts, they offered us the facility, and we were able to meet in secrecy.
What was the change that you saw in the community's culture in South Texas after they had the mergers come in and after they kind of started getting more funding for their schools?
Well, I think you saw a light of hope, understanding that things were going to be different, that we had a chance, basically. The members we were all excited because now we had something to fight for in funding. But I think in the community itself, there was a sense of it's going to get better. It's going to take time. You don't build buildings overnight. You don't get funding overnight. But just the concept of telling the young people in the high schools and in colleges at the time, look, this is what's going to happen. We're going to start getting better programs, more funding. You're going to get a degree that says University of Texas or Texas A&M University, which in my opinion means a lot more than the old names we used to have. So there was a sense of relief, but mostly hopes for the future. And it's like when I got elected the first time and I showed up for the first day of the session, I got sworn in, and I looked around and I told myself, okay, you got elected, you got sworn in, now what do you do? So once we got the merger done, okay, where do we go from here? It took further planning, but we turned it over to professional people, civic leaders, educators. Okay, guys, here's the enchilada. You got to figure out how to cook it and how to divide it and so forth, because they were the experts. We had a lot of support from educational leaders to telling us this is what we really need, this is what you should do. But once we got the universities there, they had to work with the administrations in Austin and College Station, and we had to be able to convince them to get the right information, the right data, to convince the regents and the administration that that's where we should go.
How did the group get the funding for the lawsuit?
Well, MALDEF works on contributions. We wrote letters to corporations, to donors, etc., to support the lawsuit. A lot of the people involved in the lawsuit wrote checks, contributions, and we went to the cities, chambers, and said, "Hey guys, this benefits all of you. It's for all of you. So you got to get your businesses to get involved and write checks to MALDEF and so forth." So, you know, and the thing about it is, MALDEF worked extremely hard, won the lawsuit, and the state law says if you sue the state and you win the lawsuit, the state has to pay your legal expenses. Getting that money was like pulling teeth again. That was another fight we had to deal with. Completely, it took years before they agreed to pay any money, and they didn't pay 100% of it.
Did you pay that back to the contributors?
No, to MALDEF.
Okay,
The expenses they had.
Okay.
There's other lawsuits that come up and so forth. They don't have a flush of funds to just draw from it. So, but the aftermath of the whole deal was to see the professionals in the community leaders get involved and start carving out. For example, my good friend, the late Irma Rangel, she was able to get a school of pharmacy in Kingsville. And her sister was a pharmacist. There were no pharmaceutical schools. If you want to be a pharmacist, you had to come to Austin. That was the bottom line. So all those things that they have developed in different schools, and the schools we have of nursing in Corpus Christi and engineering and so forth, the change has been dramatic. The quality of students we're getting out that are graduating. And the other thing is, Austin as a whole is a big draw for young people. They get a degree here, they stay here. A lot of the students that graduate from Corpus and the Valley schools in Laredo and Kingsville, they tend to stay in South Texas. So not only before the merger, we would get students that would come up here to Austin and to College Station, but they wouldn't come back. The jobs weren't there and so forth. So that's another improvement that you see in the long run. After the colleges were established, the first graduate classes came out, that they stay home. And now you have a higher educated workforce, leadership for the community, et cetera. And so it just goes on and on. It multiplies.
What do you think has not changed for people who are still going to these underfunded universities?
Well, you know, my argument to UT and A&M was, we don't want to create another UT campus or another A&M campus. Those people that can come here and can afford it and have the grades to do it, their resumes are awesome, they should come here. So we don't want to build another type of campus. We're never going to be, our schools in South Texas are never going to be another UT campus or an A&M campus, and they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be. But we should have a level of education where you have great professors, great programs, where people that are staying at home, and I should correct that, because now we have a lot of students that come from other parts of the state to those schools, because like Corpus is a great business school, that they get a good quality education. In no way would they ever think we're going to create another UT or another A&M. It's not necessary. But my argument was, if you give the students, the people in our area, a quality education, they won't think about coming to Austin or A&M because of the cost or having to relocate, and they're still able to get a quality education. So the quality has severely improved. I mean, its percentage is much greater, but it still has a way to go. And with more programs and more quality, there was some talk earlier this year about a merger between Kingsville and Corpus. But politically, it blew up and so forth. But any way we can save money to improve education down there, not duplicate programs, have more quality programs like the medical school and so forth. There's no sense in having a medical school now in Corpus if you have one in the Valley. So those things are, every year it gets better. For me to say, and I wouldn't be qualified to say it, we're at the level we should be, I don't think it'll ever happen. You should always be striving to improve, but it's you know, a lot better than it used to be.
Do you think that in the future they might have the potential to reach top tier or tier 1 status? Any of the schools from UTEP all the way down to
Well,
Brownsville?
that requires a lot of research dollars, and it depends on the economy and what's going on. There's times where there's a lot of research dollars, and there's times where there are not. There's a lot of competition for it. The idea of the merger between Corpus Christi and Kingsville, that if you added their research dollars, it bumped them up into a tier 1 university. That was the whole concept. But as you remember when I told you when we started the merger, you're taking away our football team, you're taking away our name. Where's the president going to live? Is he going to be here, or is he going to be, silly things that have nothing to do with the quality of education, but that's life. That's what you have to face with.
Earlier in your, when we were reflecting on your childhood, you mentioned that your parents got mad at your sister for wanting to move away to college. Was that a sentiment for the majority of the community you grew up in, or just your family specifically?
Well, I think it was a sentiment, a general sentiment, not necessarily the moving away, but not going into the workforce. Okay, you need to get a job. Look, my father said I had a 3rd grade education. I got a job. You should go out and get one. Economics had a big factor in that. A lot of people didn't have money. We were poor, but didn't exactly have a lot of money. So I think it's a general sentiment that I didn't finish school. I got you through high school. Hey man, get a job, go to work, do something. But that was back then. Nowadays, like I said, anywhere. Young kids are talking about college, and I've got a granddaughter that's a senior in high school, and she wants to go to New York. I'm going, who would have thought when I was a kid we would ever go to New York, right? So back then, yes, that was a general sentiment. I got you through high school. I supported you through high school. Now you need to start supporting the family and so forth.
Did you have any political mentors when you were starting out?
Sure. There was always people that helped me. We helped each other. Governor Richards was one of my dearest friends, mentor. There was different members of the legislature that I worked with. Back home, there was people. The way to learn to do anything is to listen to people that have done it before. And I've never been shy about asking questions. And every time that I would do something that would fail, my concept was, why did I fail? I mean, I did something wrong, obviously. So I would go talk to the people that make me fail. I know you were against me. Please tell me why, and so forth. I remember the first time I ran, there was one gentleman that was very active in the community, had a lot of money, supported my opponent. So I got elected, and the first phone call I made was to him. I said, I'd like to come over and visit with you. So he came over and said, look, you didn't support me. You gave my opponent a lot of money. I said, but it's over. I won, and I want you to know that if I can help you in any way, but I want to know why you didn't support me and supported him. He said, we were old friends. Well, so I can respect that. So I didn't have a bias against him because he supported my opponent, who they were both good friends. So I respected that. And I learned that if somebody doesn't vote for you or doesn't support your program or is against you, find out what the reason is. They might have a good reason. I remember one friend of mine was supporting my opponent, a good friend of mine. I asked him, why are you supporting the other guy instead of me? We're friends. He said, I feel sorry for the other guy. He doesn't have anybody. So we shook hands on it, see? So I didn't carry a grudge against him or get mad at him. So the point is, if you fail at something, find out why, and maybe you can correct the problem and next time succeed.
Speaking of failing and learning from those lessons, a few years later when the Texas Supreme Court overturned the case, what did you note about the impact that this had on the initiative's legacy?
Well, I think it was too late. I mean, the process had already was in progress. The ideas that we presented and made to the legislature and to the universities and the organization of people involved, it was too late to stop. Nothing was going to deter us anymore. We had those 2 victories, and other members of the legislature understood what the issues were and understood we weren't a threat to them, et cetera. So I don't think a red flag was raised. It was not positive news, but it's something we just said, okay, that's another obstacle we have to overcome. But I don't remember anything slowing down on either side of the negotiations.
Looking back on the entire experience, what meaning does the lawsuit and the South Border Texas Initiative have in the longer narrative of Texas history? And what significance does it still have today for the South Texas region?
Well, you go to today's present times with the immigration issues and what's going on currently, to talk about the wall and so forth. I think it brought South Texas into the mindset that, hey, we are a part of Texas. We are a part of the taxes that are being spent. We're not just stepchildren on here. Because you'd be surprised how many people in the legislature have never been to South Texas, never visited, had no occasion to, no need to, et cetera, and so forth. So by having these 2 initiatives, it brought attention to South Texas, it brought an education to people about South Texas, and it brought a sense of pride to people in South, younger people, students, and so forth, that we're not being shortchanged on the quality of education. So I think, all in all, it brought a unity. There's still a lot of disagreements and so forth, and there always will be. But I think it brought an economic upturn for everybody. More jobs came down here, more understanding, more money, and in the long run, that helped in the way we felt about each other, about personally ourselves. We felt proud. We had more children, our children going to college and so forth, graduating. If you look at the Hispanic members of the legislature now, from the Valley and from all parts of the state, there's 2 things that are very noticeable. They're a lot more better educated than we were, and there's a lot more women. And I mean, when I was there was 1 Hispanic female, Irma Rangel. Now there must be a dozen or so. And they're all bright, and the young men are bright. And that's just, a lot of it's stemming, I think, from this initiative that got people educated, involved in politics. So it's been a huge impact. For the future, like I said earlier, you never finish growing mentally, educationally, involvement-wise. There's still, you see the turnout levels of voting is still very dismal. That's one area we're still trying to figure out how we're going to get more people to the polls. But I think the impact it's had has been tremendous. There's still a lot of work to do. We still need more programs down there, need more graduates, more jobs, more quality paying jobs, and more respect for South Texas from the rest of not only the state, but the country.
For those people or organizations that are mobilizing to pressure the current legislature to act on certain issues, what are some key, quick takeaways that they could get from looking back on the LULAC case and the subsequent initiative?
Oh, well, I think what they're doing is awesome. I think, I don't think they need to look back. I think they're doing, some of the strategies we use will not work today because of the different environment, the different times. We can't come in and say anymore, hey, we don't have anything, right? Hey, guys, you got something. What do you want now? So the strategies are different. What I see in today's involvement is the same vigor, the same involvement, the quality of people. And I'm not talking about, there's some people that only have an education that are marching up here and so forth. The dedication they're doing is the same. So my advice is just to keep it up. I mean, it works. Look, the one thing you learn from the past is that it works. I mean, it's not for not. Things will change, but it only change if you stay active.
So afterward, you ultimately ended up serving 5 terms,
Right.
and then could you tell me a little bit about your appointment as the chairman of the Texas Workforce Commission? And
Yes.
Right at the beginning of your 6th, technically. Could you explain a little bit about
Well, my previous term, Governor Richards, I got elected, got sworn in, and Governor Richards called me to the office. He said, I'm going to appoint you to the State Board of Insurance, because I was chairman of the insurance committee at the time, and I had an insurance agency and so forth, a casualty agency. So I said, great. And then the lawyer called and said, can't do it. The law says once you take the oath, you cannot get appointed to a position until not the session is over. I can't even quit. I mean, I could quit, but it still wouldn't qualify me until the term is over. So fast forward 2 years later, I get reelected. And before I come up here to take the oath, the governor calls and said, don't do it again. Don't take the oath. So she appoints me to the Workforce Commission. There was 1 vacancy, and then there's 3 commissioners, and one of the commissioners at that time passed away. So the Republican senators who had to approve my nomination, who were friends of mine, called me in and said, look, we want to get a Republican appointed to the other spot. So we're going to hold up your nomination to pressure the governor into appointing a Republican for the other post. So I was caught in a quandary there that I was elected to the House, but I wasn't officially sworn in, so I couldn't participate. My appointment had not been approved by the Senate, so I couldn't go to work at the Workforce Commission. So I was in limbo. But then a good friend of mine, state legislator, Ron Lewis, came up with an idea. He was from Orange, Texas. He said, Eddie, they're rushing through a funding bill for the city of Houston on emerging funding for some highways. And it's going to go through here in a couple of days. If we can put a stop to that funding for Houston to push the Republicans to have a hearing for you and approve your nomination. The approval wasn't a problem. It was for them to have a hearing on it. So the Hispanic caucus, the Black caucus, and all the other, not all, but most of the Anglo-Democratic members on the side send word to the speaker, we're not going to approve the funding for Houston until Eddie gets approved. And like the next day I had a hearing, and the nominations committee approved me and the full Senate approved me, and I went to work.
How did your work with the initiative impact or inform your political work afterward?
Well, I still have a lot of interest in a lot of issues in the state of Texas, and particularly education, both public and higher education.